What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. We have a lot to talk about, not a lot of time to talk about it, though, since I have somewhere that I have to be in a few minutes. So we're going to try to discuss everything that we have on the docket for tonight's episode in an orderly and timely fashion. I saw this huge debate break out on X. It started to go viral over who was better, Matt Ryan or Cam Newton. The huge lie that a lot of fans fall for in the offseason due to this stat that gets thrown out way too much. Colin Cowherd had some very bad takes about not just the Steelers, but also Lamar Jackson that we're going to dive into and break down why he's wrong and why he continues to get it wrong. There's a rookie quarterback last season that lit the NFL on fire and literally nobody talked about how good he was. And we got thoughts on the Bengals and the Chiefs. How good are they going to be this season? Why they should bounce back. If you live, eat, breathe, sleep, and die football, congratulations. You have arrived at the right place. We're talking all things football, NFL, college football, 24/7, 365 days throughout the year. If you're a diehard football fan and you can't go a day without getting your football fix in, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon so you do not miss when we drop new content. Remember, we are not just a YouTube channel. We are a podcast. You can find this episode along with all of our previous episodes in audio format on all podcasting platforms. If you enjoy the content, you want to support the grind, all we ask is that you give us a 5-star review. We are trying to crack the top 100 on Apple for football podcasts. The only way that can happen is with your help. So go ahead, give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts from, Apple, Spotify. The links are down in the description down below. Shout out to everybody that's tuned in. Shout out to my guy, GC Gaming Community. Shout out to everybody wherever you're watching YouTube, whether you're watching the replay. I appreciate you for tuning in. Let's dive into it. Over the past 42 hours, a huge argument has broken out on X over who was better, Matt Ryan or Cam Newton. Now, to me, Matt Ryan clearly had the better career from a statistical standpoint, a production standpoint, an accolade standpoint. He was a better quarterback than Cam Newton. But the reason Cam Newton is still viewed in a higher regard than Matt Ryan, despite Matt Ryan having a better career, is that when people think about Cam Newton, they define his career based off 2 years. What he did 2010 when he carried Auburn to a national championship with only one NFL player on it, that being Nick Fairley and a bunch of randos. And when he won NFL MVP, took the Panthers to the Super Bowl in 2015. Those are the 2 seasons that first come to mind when the career of Cam Newton is brought up. Those 2 years have shaped the perception of Cam Newton's entire career. And although those 2 seasons were peak years for any quarterback, college and NFL, I feel like Cam Newton had the greatest peak of any quarterback in the NFL outside of Lamar Jackson. When Cam Newton was at his peak, he was the quarterback that everybody wanted. The issue with Cam Newton and why I can't put him over Matt Ryan is Matt Ryan, for the majority of the 2010s, was a consistent top 10 quarterback. He never was a top 3, top 5 quarterback, but he was consistently somewhere between the 7th, 8th, 9th best quarterback in the NFL. Cam Newton, for the majority of his career, outside of what he did, his MVP season with the Panthers, he wasn't a top 10 quarterback that often. The majority of the times, he was a fringe top 10 quarterback. He was either the 11th or 12th best quarterback in the league. Cam Newton was not that good throwing the football compared to Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan is top 10 all time in passing yards, passing touchdowns, pass attempts. Cam Newton is nowhere close to that. And I understand that they had two different playing styles, but they played in the same division. And oftentimes, Cam Newton was overshadowed by how good Matt Ryan and Drew Brees were. Cam Newton never completed over 60% of his passes for his career. He only had about 1 or 2 seasons where he finished over a 60% completion percentage. His MVP season was the most touchdown passes that he ever threw compared to Matt Ryan, who had multiple 30-plus touchdown campaigns. Matt Ryan didn't have the peak that Cam Newton had, but he had the better overall career because he consistently was a top 10 quarterback. He had better consistent seasons than what Cam Newton put together. Cam Newton never took the Carolina Panthers to back-to-back playoff appearances for a very good reason. He wasn't as good consistently as what people think. The same way people talk about Cam Newton is the same way people talk about Michael Vick. How Cam Newton is perceived is largely due in part to nostalgia. A lot of us, if you're in my generation and you're around my age, you grew up on Cam Newton. When you first got into football, you saw Cam Newton doing the dab. You saw him doing the Superman celebration. Cam Newton, for a lot of people my age and my generation, if you're Gen Z, Cam Newton was your childhood. You had the Under Armour cleats. It was just hard not to be a fan of Cam Newton. But if we disassociate our fandom and our nostalgia for Cam Newton, when it comes to Cam Newton versus Matt Ryan was consistently better than Cam Newton. He was a consistent top 10 quarterback. He consistently gave the Falcons 25 touchdowns or more regularly. Cam Newton wasn't doing that. And just overall, for a guy in Matt Ryan who's top 10 in passing yards, top 10 in passing touchdowns, he has a stronger Hall of Fame argument than what Cam Newton has. The only thing that Matt Ryan hasn't accomplished was winning a Super Bowl. Same thing for Cam Newton, but I respect Matt Ryan, how he lost in the Super Bowl, choking a 28-3 lead, more than I respect how Cam Newton lost that Super Bowl to the Broncos, refusing to dive on the football in the biggest game of his career. I just feel that the only reason people put Cam Newton over Matt Ryan is solely based off nostalgia, because statistically and production-wise, Matt Ryan cleared Cam Newton. Cam Newton was more popular than Matt Ryan. I asked Falcons fans a year ago, who was better, Michael Vick or Matt Ryan? The majority of people said Michael Vick, acting like Michael Vick had anywhere as near the success and the consistency that Matt Ryan had. People don't respect Matt Ryan's career because he wasn't flashy. He wasn't running around making all these spectacular plays. He was a pocket quarterback. He was going to destroy you from the pocket. But during that era, the pocket quarterback still was a big thing. And even in today's NFL, the quarterbacks that are still winning championships aren't the ones that can make all these highlight reel runs, that can make all of these highlight reel throws. Josh Allen and Lamar don't have rings. So the pocket quarterback, the quarterbacks that are still winning are the ones that can beat you with their skill set primarily being beating you from within the pocket. Cam Newton was a more popular player than Matt Ryan, but he wasn't better than Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan beats Cam Newton when it comes to consistency, statistics, and production. Matt Ryan has time to the numbers as to what Cam Newton had. Cam Newton didn't last as long as what Matt Ryan did because he just wasn't that good throwing the football as compared to what Matt Ryan was. The only reason that people put Cam Newton over Matt Ryan is solely based off favoritism, popularity, and nostalgia. Popularity and influence doesn't mean you were the better player. Cam Newton is more influential and more exciting than Matt Ryan. Same way Michael Vick was more influential than a lot of quarterbacks who had better careers than him. But when we're talking about who had the better career between Matt Ryan and Cam Newton, statistically, Matt Ryan was better. And he was more reliable also. There's a huge lie that's been told since the beginning of time in the NFL. The most misleading stat that gets overused every offseason is the strength of schedule metric. People act like strength of schedule tells you how good a team is going to be. I was listening to Colin Cowherd and Danny Parkins give their early over-under win totals a few days ago. Colin Cowherd has the Cowboys under 8.5 wins because they have the 5th most difficult schedule according to strength of schedule rankings. But strength of schedule is based off last season. No team comes into a new season the same team that they were the previous year. That's why strength of schedule is such a relevant stat. Strength of schedule is built off old information. Strength of schedule is based off what every team in the NFL's record was last year. It doesn't account for the coaching changes that those teams may have made, the personnel changes that they might have made, their draft picks, their free agency acquisitions. The NFL changes year to year. Sometimes you have teams that have good records because they were good in one-score games. They had a little bit of luck on their side late in games also. And then you have teams that were expected to be good that end up disappointing, like how the Ravens, the Chiefs, the Bengals, and the Lions did last year. Then you also have teams that weren't expected to be good and end up being playoff teams. Prime example, the Carolina Panthers and the Jacksonville Jaguars, which is why strength of schedule is the most misleading stat in NFL history. You cannot determine how strong a team schedule is if you're judging these teams based off what they were last year. You could have the worst record in the NFL last season and end up being a much better team going into this season than what you were last year. So how can I assess how good of a team you are if my assessment is based off what your record was last season? Bad teams don't always stay bad unless you're the New York Jets or the Cleveland Browns. Those are the only franchises that you can always bet on are going to suck. Other than that, it's pretty much random who ends up being bad, who ends up being good. One of my homies told me it's way too early to be making predictions on the NFL season. We got to wait for guys to tear their Achilles, tear their ACLs, like how it always seems to happen with the majority of the 49ers' best players. You just really never know for certain. I feel that strength of schedule also doesn't account for the matchups. Sometimes a team that only won 6 games last year may be able to beat a team that won 10 plus games last year because they have the advantage on the line of scrimmage. They have the quarterback advantage. Division games also aren't taken into account when it comes to factoring strength of schedule, because sometimes you have a team that may be very good record-wise, but they struggle against an inferior opponent within their division because it's always tough to beat the same teams that you play twice every year. No team knows you better than the teams that you go up twice a year against in the NFL every season. Strength of schedule tells you who used to be difficult to play based on last season. It doesn't actually tell you who's going to be good based on this year coming up. Like, what about the road games? When you have a Monday night game and then you have to travel across the country to the West Coast the following week, strength of schedule doesn't account for that. How healthy is your team going to be in week 2? How healthy is your team going to be at the end of the season? Strength of schedule also doesn't account for that. The way that I do strength of schedule is I judge every team's strength of schedule not based on what happened last year. I base it off which teams I feel have the best possibility of making it to the playoffs this year. And for the Cincinnati Bengals, for example, they have one of the easiest schedules in the league because they're going up against a lot of teams that weren't that good last year and still won't be that good this year. But you look at the Cowboys, though, some of the teams that they play that look tough at the moment might not be that good when the season actually rolls around, which is why strength of schedule is the most misleading stat, the most misleading metric in NFL history. There's too often too many times, too much stock is put into how difficult of a schedule does a team have. And we use this to solely define how good a team's going to be this upcoming season instead of judging these teams based off the schedule that they play and the talent that they currently have on their roster. The NFL is a year-to-year sport. If teams stayed the same, then strength of schedule would matter. But since teams change every year, new coaches, new players, guys going in and out, guys retiring, coming in and out of the league, strength of schedule is just very misleading when you're using it to solely define how good a team's going to be coming up. Colin Cowherd and John Middlekauff are my favorite podcast duo to listen to when it comes to football. But they dropped the episode a few days ago that was very hard for me to sit through because they were hating on the Steelers. And I don't have an issue with people that have criticisms of my favorite team. I'm not one of those fans that gets my feelings hurt, gets bent out of shape because somebody has a different opinion than what I do about my favorite team. When it comes to Colin Cowherd, however, though, he's been wrong about the Steelers for 6 years and counting. It's kind of like at this point, Colin Cowherd is just throwing darts and hoping that he can strike a bullseye by continuing to fade the only team that has gone 2 decades without having a single losing season. Somehow, though, despite the Steelers being a model for what a consistent winning franchise looks like in the NFL, Colin Cowherd would tell you that the Steelers are trending down to becoming what the Browns and the New York Jets have been over the past 15 years. The Steelers are not a poorly ran organization. Poorly ran organizations don't manage to consistently go 9-8, 10-7, and get knocked out of the first round of playoffs. Just because the Steelers haven't won a playoff game in over a decade doesn't mean that they're becoming a poorly ran organization. Only 14 teams can make it to the postseason. So if you end up making it to the playoffs, regardless what happens after, you were better than the majority of the NFL. And there is something in the Steelers always having a winning season, never being a losing season, never being bad enough to bottom out. The Steelers don't have to rebuild. They don't have to tank to get their long-term solution at quarterback. Have the Eagles ever tanked under Howie Roseman when they had quarterback issues? No. Have the 49ers ever tanked for a quarterback? Have the Packers ever tanked for a quarterback? The Ravens didn't tank for Lamar Jackson. The Chiefs didn't tank for Patrick Mahomes. The Bills didn't tank for Josh Allen. The majority of the most consistent franchises in the NFL do not win the way that a lot of folks in the media suggest they should go about winning in order to build up their team to be good enough to consistently compete for a Super Bowl. There's this misconception that the Steelers just need to blow it all up because since they keep on making it to the playoffs and going nowhere, that means that they need to have a fire sale. You don't blow up a team that consistently makes it to the playoffs because you're judging them by the ceiling and you're overlooking what the floor is. The Steelers have the highest floor out of any team in the NFL every season. You can count on the Steelers winning 9 games. No matter how bad the team looks on paper, no matter how many concerns you have about the quarterback position, the Steelers some way, somehow are going to find a way to win at least 9 games. Most fan bases would kill for what the Steelers' version of disappointment is. That's why so many fans were conflicted about the amount of backlash that Mike Tomlin has received from the Steelers fan base over the past few years, because Mike Tomlin, for most franchises, winning 9 games, winning your division, making it to the playoffs, regardless if you lose in the first round or not, will be considered a successful season. But since this is the Pittsburgh Steelers and they're one of the NFL's most storied franchises, and what has made the Steelers' expectations so high is based off the tradition that they've had of winning multiple Super Bowls, being a consistent Super Bowl contender year in and year out when they were at their peak, and they haven't been at a Super Bowl caliber level in a while. But just because you're not competing for Super Bowls, it doesn't mean that you're a poorly ran organization. There's only been one team in the AFC over the past 7-8 years that has won this conference and has gone on to win the Super Bowl, and that has been the Kansas City Chiefs. Before them, it was the New England Patriots and Tom Brady. So outside of those two teams, nobody else has been having success in the postseason along with the Steelers. The only difference between the Steelers, the Ravens, the Bills, and everybody else not named the Kansas City Chiefs is that the Steelers start their offseason normally a week or two earlier than everybody else. But there's no difference between what the Steelers have done in the postseason, what the Ravens and the Bills have done in the postseason. Neither organization is winning the Super Bowl. Neither organization is coming close to winning the bowl. So the season is still a disappointment regardless. So if the Steelers are being viewed as a poorly ran organization because they haven't won a playoff game in over a decade, then there's a handful of other teams that should be considered poorly ran also. And the hate that Colin Cowherd has for Omar Khan really is puzzling to me. He said that his sources within the league don't understand Omar Khan's personnel decisions. They don't think he understands how to build a good team, even though Omar Khan, his last few draft classes have been better than the last few draft classes that Kevin Colbert put together. Omar Khan's first few years, he had to waste trying to undo the damage that Kevin Colbert did from how terrible he drafted. Omar Khan, his first 2-3 draft classes with the Steelers, he's drafted at least 3 or more starters. Jordan Porter Jr. is one of the better young corners in the league. He was an Omar Khan draft pick. Several starters on the offensive line for the Steelers this year have also been Omar Khan draft picks. And not every single starter on the offensive line is terrible. There are several young, good players on defense, like Logan Wilson, who also was a Omar Khan draft pick. So there are plenty of good players that the Steelers have drafted under Omar Khan. Sure, Omar Khan has had a few bad decisions. Sure, if he could redo the DK Metcalf trade, he probably would like to have that one over, or he would like to do that one over again. But you look at what the Steelers currently have coming into this season, the Steelers have never been more talented than what they currently are right now. Sure, they aren't a team that has a lot of big names like how the Ravens do or the Chiefs, but I think that the Steelers have one of the more complete rosters in the AFC. Once again, I'm not saying they have one of the best rosters in the entire NFL. I'm just saying from top to bottom, if you just ignore a quarterback, the Steelers have a pretty solid team. The offensive line is solid with a lot of young players on it. The defense has a mix of aging veterans, but also a bunch of young and ascending up-and-coming players with good depth on the front seven. This doesn't look like a general manager who can't build a roster. This looks like a general manager that has been held back a little bit by Mike Tomlin, who, let's be honest, Mike Tomlin, although he was not part of the solution, he was part of the problem. Mike Tomlin wasn't a bad coach. Mike Tomlin, I felt, is one of the most underappreciated coaches in the history of the NFL. Ultimately, what hurt Mike Tomlin was that some of the personnel decisions that he did have a little bit of say on, and if you believe that Mike Tomlin never had a say in any of the Steelers' personnel decisions, I think you're very naive. You can't be one of the longest tenured coaches in the NFL, coach one franchise for nearly 2 decades, and them not give you somewhat of a say when it comes to how the roster is constructed, who you hire to be on your coaching staff. What hurt Mike Tomlin is that the Steelers had the NFL's most expensive defense last year, and it underperformed because Mike Tomlin, despite being a defensive-minded coach, didn't know how to get the most out of that side of the ball because he didn't want to part ways with Terrell Austin. What handicapped Mike Tomlin and ultimately held back the Steelers from having more success over these last few years is that the Steelers were only as good as what Mike Tomlin was. And Mike Tomlin was pretty good, but once you get to the postseason, you aren't enough. You got to have a good coaching staff. Mike Tomlin didn't surround himself with a good coaching staff. He always made sure that the coaching staff was one of the worst aspects of the team that he always had to overcome. From hiring Matt Canada, Randy Fichtner, Arthur Smith, Mike Tomlin has never gotten it right at offensive coordinator since he got rid of Todd Haley to appease Big Ben. Mike Tomlin was a good coach, but he held himself back and held the Steelers back because there are certain things that he just couldn't get right. Getting the coaching staff right was one of it. Getting the quarterback right was the second part of it. Mike Tomlin wasn't the only thing wrong with the Steelers, but he was a big problem that the Steelers had. So when Colin Cowherd comes out and says that Mike Tomlin stepped down because he saw the writing on the wall, he knew that things are about to get a lot worse from a personnel standpoint, I disagree with that. Getting Michael Pittman improves one of the biggest flaws that the Steelers had on offense last year. They had a weak wide receiving core for Aaron Rodgers to throw the football to. Outside of DK Metcalf, Aaron Rodgers' second most reliable option in the passing game was a running back. So getting Michael Pittman is a big addition to the Steelers' offense. Signing Rico Dowdle, who at one point during last season was looking like he was going to win MVP, is going to be a good pickup for a team that was 26th in the league in rushing yards per game. What about the additions that the Steelers made on defense? Colin Cowherd watches a lot of the Chicago Bears, so he should know how good of a player Jaquan Brisker is and how big of a steal it was that the Steelers were able to sign him for the deal that they got him on. Jamel Dean, very underrated corner, very good press man-to-man corner, is going to be a good pickup on the opposite side of JPJ. Like, the Steelers don't have a roster that's lacking in talent. There's a reason why they have the NFL's most expensive defense. So obviously, there's talent on that side of the football. Sure, the Mekhi Lemon situation. Look, I wanted Mekhi Lemon. He was my favorite wide receiver coming out of this draft class. I thought he was the undisputed wide receiver one. And the Steelers not getting Mekhi Lemon despite being on the phone with him, I agree with Colin Cowherd and John Middlekauff. It was a bad look. It was absolutely embarrassing. But that's what comes with the draft. Not every team gets the ideal dream player that they have circled as the number one guy on their board. Part of the draft is you got to have multiple different plans. So when the Steelers didn't get Mekhi Lemon, they got a very good offensive tackle out of Arizona State. John Middlekauff is from the Arizona area, so he should know how good this offensive tackle is. And Colin Cowherd always praises the Packers and all the other teams that draft offensive linemen high. But when the Steelers draft the offensive lineman, though, it doesn't get any respect for him. It doesn't earn any brownie points with him, though, even though the Steelers have invested more picks on the offensive line than they've had any other position in the last few drafts. And a lot of those guys are starters, though. But leave it to Colin Cowherd, though. Omar Khan doesn't know personnel. Omar Khan continues to get embarrassed by the rest of the league. Like, the Steelers are one of the best drafting teams in the National Football League. There are only about 3 or 4 teams that have drafted better than the Pittsburgh Steelers have over the past 5 years. Like, even the Kansas City Chiefs. John Middlekauff and Colin Cowherd always praise how good of a GM Brett Veach is, but they don't talk about the whiffs that he has had in the draft over the last couple of years that put Kansas City in the position that they were last year and they currently are right now. Talk about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He was a whiff. Xavier Worthy, he looks like a whiff. There are so many other teams that Colin Cowherd gives a lot of respect to that have drafted worse than what the Steelers have, but somehow, though, he keeps finding ways to make it seem like the Steelers are becoming the new New York Jets or the new version of the Cleveland Browns. It's just ridiculous to compare one of the most consistently winning franchises in all the sports to some of the consistently worst franchises in all the sports. Comparing the Steelers to the New York Jets and the Cleveland Browns is the equivalent to comparing the Boston Celtics to the Charlotte Hornets. You can't compare a franchise that has gone over 2 decades without a single losing season to 2 teams that always have losing seasons. I can't recall the last time the Jets or the Browns finished the season with a winning record. Like, the Steelers' ceiling is the problem. The Steelers have a high floor, but their ceiling is very low. You know that the Steelers' floor is 9 wins, possibly get into the playoffs and lose it in the first round. But the ceiling, though, is making it to the playoffs and losing in the first round. I think that the problem with the Steelers' ceiling was Mike Tomlin not assembling a good coaching staff and him not being able to get the quarterback position right, which is, it's not all on him. But I feel with the Steelers getting Aaron Rodgers back, which goes to the biggest point that Colin Cowherd has made as why the Steelers aren't going to be that successful this year and for the foreseeable future, is how Aaron Rodgers has the Steelers on a leash. He's walking the Steelers like a dog because he gets to do whatever he wants to. We don't know if Aaron Rodgers is going to play this year or not, even though last year when we had this same conversation being had, the Steelers already knew that Aaron Rodgers was going to play this year. It's just that the people in the national media didn't. But since Aaron Rodgers didn't let the national media know what his intentions were, he was running the Steelers around. He was running the Steelers in circles. He had the Steelers on a leash. Just because these players don't tell you what they're going to do doesn't mean they're not going to do it. The Steelers know that Aaron Rodgers is coming back this season. All of these players know that Aaron Rodgers is coming back this season. This team has been constructed with the understanding that Aaron Rodgers will be starting at quarterback this year, because you wouldn't bring back TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, have all these aging vets still on the team like Jalen Ramsey if you weren't going to have Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. If you were going to start either Will Howard or Drew Aller, you would have much younger players, because there's no use in keeping veteran guys around with a team that doesn't have the expectation of trying to win right now. Aaron Rodgers gave the Steelers their best quarterback play in over 6 years. The brother had 24 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, despite having a head coach who was Stevie Wonder when it came to offense, an offensive coordinator that was one of the worst in the league, 26 rated rushing attack, and his 2 best weapons being a running back and DK Metcalf. So if Aaron Rodgers getting Rico Dowdle and getting Michael Pittman, and the Steelers drafting an offensive tackle in the first round and then making up for missing on Mekhi Lemon in the second round by trading up for Jeremy Bernard, the Steelers have a better supporting cast for Aaron Rodgers that have more success than what he had last season, which is why the Steelers are waiting for Aaron Rodgers to return, because this team, all the offseason moves that were made this year by the Steelers were solely based off the assumption that Aaron Rodgers is going to be back, and he will be back. Aaron Rodgers had a lot of fun last year, and Aaron Rodgers is somebody that he respects tradition. He respects consistency. That's why he loves Pittsburgh. Sure, there are other teams that are better than Pittsburgh that if they wanted Aaron Rodgers right now, he probably would prefer those teams over the Steelers, but you're supposed to go where you're appreciated, not where you're tolerated. And Aaron Rodgers had the amount of fun he had last year because the Steelers actually appreciated him. The guys in the locker room loved him. Mike Tomlin loved him. And I have no issue with Aaron Rodgers starting that quarterback again. I don't want to see my favorite team potentially wave the white flag for the sake of we got to suck to be in position to draft a franchise quarterback, even though the Ravens got Lamar Jackson, trading to the back end of the first round to get him. We passed on Lamar Jackson for a box safety that most of you guys probably don't even remember his name. It was Terrell Edmonds. So the Steelers have had multiple chances to draft the franchise quarterback. Mike Tomlin just had Stevie Wonder eyes when it came to being able to find who the right successor to Big Ben was. But the problem with the Steelers is not structure, is not how the organization is ran. Like, you can't call an organization that's gone 20 straight years without a single losing season poorly ran. I just don't understand that, especially when you picked against them last year to make it to the playoffs and they won the freaking division. I mean, sure, the postseason success, you expect more for a franchise like the Steelers, but postseason success doesn't define how good or how bad a franchise is. There are other franchises that don't win the Super Bowl. Only one team can hoist the Lombardi at the end of the year. So if everybody else isn't hoisting the Lombardi trophy, then their season ended the same way that the Steelers season ended, in disappointment. The only difference was the Steelers were in Cancun a week or two earlier than everybody else. That's not the only take from Colin Cowherd that really grind my gear. So Colin Cowherd ranked his top 10 quarterbacks in the AFC going into this season. And at first, when you look at the list, it's nothing wrong with it. Josh Allen's number one. Some folks may disagree with that, but having Josh Allen as the best quarterback in the AFC isn't really something that's going to rile me up. That's understandable. Patrick Mahomes at 2. I will argue that Joe Burrow is better, but not really a huge debate there. Joe Burrow at 3, once again, I don't have a problem with that. Then we get to number 4, and this is when shit completely hits the fan. I gotta take a few seconds to compose myself, because I could not believe that Colin Cowherd really had the audacity to rank Justin Herbert as the 4th best quarterback in the AFC over a 3-time first-team All-Pro, a should-be 3-time MVP, but he did it, though. Colin Cowherd, I don't know if he went to the FS1 studio this day that he put out these rankings, high, drunk. He went into that studio on something, because there's no way that Colin Cowherd could have ranked Justin Herbert as the 4th best quarterback in the AFC over Lamar Jackson with the straight face. You mean to tell me that Justin Herbert, the guy that's 0-3 in the postseason, that saves his worst football for the biggest stage, is better than Lamar Jackson? Just because Lamar Jackson had somewhat of a down season because he was playing through injuries doesn't mean that all of a sudden Justin Herbert has surpassed Lamar Jackson as a quarterback. Let me remind you guys that the offensive coordinator that wasn't good enough, that was holding back Justin Herbert in the postseason with the Chargers, was the same offensive coordinator that got Lamar Jackson his first MVP. Greg Roman got fired because he was the reason why Justin Herbert was stinking it up his 2 seasons in the playoffs under John Harbaugh. Yet, for some reason, though, this same offensive coordinator that was holding back Justin Herbert in the playoffs and Greg Roman helped Lamar Jackson win his first MVP, helped Lamar Jackson win a few playoff games. Greg Roman was good enough for Lamar Jackson to win his first MVP and to win a few playoff games, but he wasn't good enough for Justin Herbert, though. So is that all Greg Roman's fault? Or some of that on Justin Herbert? Because, I mean, if he was winning with Lamar Jackson in the postseason, I don't see why he couldn't have had success with Justin Herbert in the postseason if Justin Herbert truly is a much better quarterback than Lamar Jackson. He's not, which is why Greg Roman got fired. Because, yes, we know that Greg Roman's passing schemes aren't really that great, but he had more success with Lamar in the postseason than what he did with Justin Herbert. Because Lamar Jackson is a better quarterback than Justin Herbert. People continuously make excuses for Justin Herbert coming up short in the playoffs. You can't call Justin Herbert an elite quarterback. An elite quarterback is supposed to elevate their team. They're supposed to be able to overcome certain flaws with the team. Justin Herbert can't seem to do that because Chargers fans always say, well, he doesn't have a good offensive line, which I agree with. The offensive line had a bunch of injuries. It was a lot worse than what it was supposed to be going into last year. But Justin Herbert's play wasn't negatively affected by the poor offensive line performance until he got to the playoffs. All of a sudden, the bad offensive line made him look like the worst quarterback in the NFL when he looked like one of the better quarterbacks for the majority of the season, in spite of how bad the offensive line was. When you are 0-3 in the playoffs, it's not just a coordinator, a personnel, and team problem. Some of that is a you problem. Quarterback is such a strange position because we give these guys so much praise when things are going right. But when things aren't going right, though, and they're not having the success that they are expected to have, we always say they don't have this, they don't have that. It's insanity to rank Justin Herbert over Lamar Jackson, Colin Cowherd. Lamar Jackson, despite missing a few games last year, he still had damn near the same stats that Justin Herbert put up. If Lamar Jackson would have played the entire of 2025, he would have finished with over 30 touchdowns. Like, Lamar Jackson isn't falling off. Like, we talk about how good of an athlete Lamar Jackson is, but we seem to forget that Lamar Jackson is just as good at throwing the football as he is running the football, which is why he currently has the NFL's highest career passer rating. That we not forget, 2 years ago, Lamar Jackson had over 40-plus touchdowns and less than 5 interceptions, one of the most efficient quarterback seasons that the NFL has seen since Aaron Rodgers. This is insanity to me. I get it that, we're in the offseason and, this is the perfect time to be releasing this kind of content, but come on, Colin, I expect much better for you, man. Ball, despite the folks that would disagree with that and say otherwise, you know a lot more football than what you're showing us with this list, man. You had the top 3 right. Regardless of the order, I'm not going to get bent out of shape over that. You can order these guys however way you want to, but Justin Herbert at number 4 over Lamar Jackson, that's a crime. That's a crime that should get your microphone privileges revoked for a day. That's a crime that should keep you off the air for at least a day. This dude's 0-3 in the playoffs. This dude got outplayed by Drake May and CJ Stroud when he went against them in the playoffs. But we're putting him over Lamar Jackson, a 3-time first-team All-Pro, a 2-time MVP winning quarterback, the most talented quarterback to ever put his hands on the football. I could not believe the egregiousness of this list. This was insanity. Absolute insanity to me. You know what else is insanity to me? Cam Ward is the most disrespected first overall pick in NFL history. They've been sleeping on Cam Ward ever since he came out of high school. He was a no-star recruit, had to work his way up through the ranks, starting out at the FCS level at Incarnate Ward. Then he gets overlooked, still has to go to Washington State, balls out there, still is overlooked. So he has to play his final season at Miami to warrant being justified going in the first round. He ends up becoming the first overall pick. And despite being the first overall pick, he received no coverage at all. When Cam Ward went first overall, they didn't even really talk about him being drafted first overall. They didn't even really show him that much on the stage when he was holding up that jersey. They spent more time talking about Shedeur Sanders' draft slide and Travis Hunter than what they did Cam Ward, who was the first overall pick. And Cam Ward's rookie season, I watched every game of that thing. He had a way better rookie season than what the stats show. With how bad that situation was, Cam Ward didn't even make it through his entire first year in the NFL before having his second head coach. He already is on his third head coach, and he's just in his second season with the league. He had a bad offensive line, no receivers. It's so funny how Panthers fans make all these excuses for Bryce Young stinking it up, having only 54 pass yards against the Seahawks, and their excuses, well, the Seahawks got the best defense in the NFL. Bryce Young had 54 pass yards against the Seahawks. Meanwhile, Cam Ward was giving the Seahawks all they could handle, with Alik Ayermanner being his best receiver and Chiggy Okonkwo being second behind that. Like, what Cam Ward did for the situation that he was in as a rookie, and for it to not be talked about, is why Cam Ward is the most slept on first overall pick in NFL history. But that's okay, because they've been sleeping on Cam Ward for a break, but they won't be able to keep sleeping on Cam Ward for too much longer, because with what the Tennessee Titans have given Cam Ward this year, do not be shocked when Cam Ward becomes the NFL's most improved quarterback this year. Robert Saleh is their new head coach. He hired Brian Daboll as his offensive coordinator. Brian Daboll, if you watch the New York Giants offseason Hard Knocks, he wanted Cam Ward. Cam Ward was the quarterback that he wanted to drive, he wanted to work with. They tried to entice the Titans with a possible trade for the first overall pick, but they just weren't budging, as they shouldn't, because Cam Ward is an absolute stud, and he's going to become one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. With Brian Daboll, the same guy who won a playoff game with Daniel Jones, he's going to have a system that is going to maximize all of Cam Ward's playmaking ability. That's the number one thing that stands out when you watch Cam Ward play for the Titans. He made several throws that should have resulted in negative yardage, should have resulted in sacks. I don't know how many throws Cam Ward made when he was about to be sacked. Somehow he still found the way to get the ball to an open receiver. Cam Ward's ability to improvise, his ability to make plays out of structure when things are breaking down, I think it's the number one thing that stands out about him. And he also has a very dynamic arm, and he runs the football a lot better than what he was expected to entering the league. So with Brian Daboll, this is the perfect upgrade for Cam Ward. You're getting a legit play caller. Then you drive Cornell Tate 4th overall. Now, you may disagree with how high Cornell Tate went, but it still was a need. Cornell Tate should still be a great player. You can't be no worse than what the hell you were throwing to last year. So you got Cornell Tate, you got Alec Ironmaner, you got Chigga Okonkwo. Hopefully, eventually, you get Calvin Ridley back, even though we know even when he does come back, the brother ain't going to stay healthy. He's not going to last the entire 17-game regular season. But when you at least get Calvin Ridley on the field for at least the 6-7 games that you'll have him for, you have a really good group of weapons for Cam Ward to throw the football to. And with the ascension that Cam Ward is about to make this upcoming season, he makes the Titans the perfect candidate to go from worst to first in their division. There's a bunch of teams that are being talked about for having the capability to go from last place in the division to first place in the division, and nobody's talking about the Tennessee Titans. Cam Ward, with the ascension that he's going to make this year, he easily will become the best quarterback in the AFC South. He has a higher floor than Trevor Lawrence and a higher ceiling than C.J. Stroud and Daniel Jones. The Tennessee Titans, say what you want to about some of their odd acquisitions on the defensive side of the football, you can't question Robert Saleh's defensive acumen. So whoever the Titans signed in free agency on defense, even if it's a guy you never heard of before, you got to give them the benefit of a doubt. Robert Saleh had the 49ers defense balling out with randos when Fred Warner and Nick Bosa got injured last year. So I trust Robert Saleh with the personnel decisions being made on the defensive side of the football for the Titans. So at worst, the Titans should have a top 15 defense. Their offense should at least be top 12 with the level that Cam Ward is about to reach. Like, Cam Ward's rookie season was so much better than what the statistics show. I was watching every Tennessee Titans game saying to myself, why aren't more people gassing up Cam Ward this offseason? What Caleb Williams just did with Ben Johnson last year is the same thing that Cam Ward can do with the hiring of Robert Saleh and him bringing in Brian Daboll as his offensive coordinator. And Brian Daboll had options. He could have been an offensive coordinator for a handful of other teams, and he picked Cam Ward because he knows how special Cam Ward is going to be. Like, Cam Ward is the most slept on first overall pick in NFL history, but you won't be sleeping on Cam Ward for too much longer because eventually Cam Ward this season is going to be too good to keep sleeping on. Contrary to popular belief, the Cincinnati Bengals aren't cheap, and they showed that this offseason. They spent a lot of money at trying to do right by Joe Burrow and actually giving him a real shot at competing for the Super Bowl this year. Now, I'm not a fan of every move that the Bengals have made this offseason, but I give them credit for at least attempting to fix what their biggest issue was last year, which was how putrid that defense was last year. Now, if Joe Burrow stays healthy, then possibly they could have still made the playoffs in spite of how bad their defense was, because their defense did slightly improve after Thanksgiving. But this offseason, though, they spent a lot of money on improving the defensive line. They get Boye Mafe. They signed Jonathan Allen. And then they go out and they trade the 10th overall selection for Sexy Dexy. Now, yes, the 10th overall pick for Dexter Lawrence may be a little bit too rich for some people, but it was a move that the Bengals had to make. The Bengals haven't drafted that well in the first round. You saw who they wasted their first round pick on last year and how much of a disaster that was. So why risk wasting another first round pick on an unproven commodity when you can use that to trade for a guy who's been one of the top 3 interior defensive linemen in the league for the past 4 or 5 seasons, who has been a multiple all-pro selection? Sure, he's coming off a down season that he played through injuries with, but Dexter Lawrence is one of those players that you can give the benefit of a doubt to. You know he's going to shake back, and when he does, he's going to change everything for that Cincinnati Bengals defense. He's going to have a bigger impact on the Bengals defense than what they would have had if they kept Trey Hendrickson around. Because when you have a dominant defensive tackle, it changes how offenses have to strategize for you. It's the difference between game planning for a dominant defensive tackle and game planning for a dominant pass rusher on the edge. Because at least on the edge, you can use a tight end or a running back to help out, chip them. When you got a dominant defensive tackle, there's only so much you can do. If you double team somebody in the middle of the defense, it's just a numbers game. Mathematically, you're not going to have enough numbers to block everybody that's inside the box, so somebody's going to come loose and get to the quarterback. So the ceiling that the Bengals have with Dexter Lawrence on their defense is higher than the ceiling that they would have had if they ran it back with Trey Hendrickson for a few more years. They also got Cassius Howell in the second round of the draft, who I was very high on. I had a late first-round grade on Cassius Howell. The only reason Cassius Howell wasn't a surefire first-round pick is because he had the same concerns that Ruben Bain had. He had short arms. He had T-Rex arms. But when I watched a lot of Texas A&M last year, Cassius Howell was one of the few guys on that defense that just automatically popped off screen. You literally could not watch Texas A&M's defense and not notice how much of a game wrecker Cassius Howell was. The good thing about the Cincinnati Bengals, if you're not completely a fan of every move that they made to improve the defensive side of the ball, the expectations aren't that high for the defense. Sure, everybody wants to have an elite defense, but realistically, as long as the Bengals defense is at least in the top 20, they'll be in the playoffs. For one, they have an offense that can score 30 points on you and they're asleep. Two, they have one of the easiest schedules in the NFL, and I'm not going off strength of schedule based off the opponents of the teams that the Bengals played last year based off what their records were last year. Like, the Bengals aren't playing a lot of playoff level football teams this season, in my opinion. Even before accounting for what they're going to play inside their division, the Ravens and the Steelers, the Bengals should at least, at worst, get the 10 wins. 10 wins is the worst case scenario for the Bengals this year. The best case scenario for the Bengals is you can win 14 games and possibly have the best record in this conference this year. I don't think that's too far-fetched. The Bengals are going to have one of the best offenses in the NFL. Their defense just needs to keep teams from not scoring 30, 40 points per game like how they were last year. You don't often lose too many games when you score at least 35 plus. But when your defense is giving up that much on the other end, then yeah, you're going to lose a lot. But the Bengals are just one of those organizations that I get it why it's hard to trust them, because based off their history, they haven't been that committed to trying to win. They've been very frugal. They've been very cheap. But Joe Burrow, with how vocal he's been and how he kind of has started to vocalize his frustrations a lot more publicly, he has forced the Bengals front office to have to step their game up. And they had to say, you know what? We need to appease Joe Burrow since this is the best thing that has ever happened to us ever. We need to keep this guy satisfied. So Joe Burrow kind of is a little bit of a puppet master right now. Joe Burrow knows how to get those folks in the higher ups in the Bengals organization to make some moves when they need to make them. So I think that the Bengals are locked for the playoffs this year, and they could win the AFC North. Right now, I can't really give you a definitive answer if the Bengals are going to win the AFC North or not, because I do still believe that the Ravens have a better team. They have one of the best teams in the NFL just overall from a talent standpoint. But with how light their schedule is, 10 wins is the floor. The ceiling is probably you could have the first overall seed in the AFC this year. I like what the Bengals did this offseason. Not a fan of every move that they've made, but you got to give them some brownie points for at least going out there, taking some swings. And even if they have a few hits and misses, I feel the team they have this year should definitely get them into the postseason. Shout out to everybody that's tuned in. Shout out to Kate Brinkley. We greatly appreciate you, as always, chipping in with the $20 donation. She says, people need to give Cam Ward a minute to develop in the NFL. Plus, he went to an organization that's undergoing major changes. I think he's going to shape up and be an excellent QB. Greatly appreciate you as always, JT. I greatly appreciate you as always, Kate, with all the donations and everything that you do to help support the pod. Shout out to my guy, All Pro Sting. He says how the defense of the Steelers was built last year should be investigated. I never said that Rico Dowdle was going to win MVP, my dude. I said that Rico Dowdle had a month where he looked like he could have won MVP when he had like 3 straight games when he finished with 200 plus all-purpose yards. Like, Rico Dowdle had a whole month. I don't know if it was either October or November when he was averaging like 200 total yards of offense for like 3-4 straight games. Like, Rico Dowdle had a stretch last season when he was like one of the best players in football for just a month. There was a month when Rico Dowdle looked like he was going to win MVP. I'm not saying he was an MVP candidate for the entire of the season, but there was a stretch when Rico Dowdle was putting up like 200, 250 yards of offense. If you haven't already, make sure that you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. If you live, eat, breathe, die, sleep football, we're talking all things football 24/7, 365 days throughout the year. We are not just a YouTube channel. We are a podcast. You can find us wherever you get your podcast from. Apple, Spotify, the links are down in the description below. We are trying to get to 100 5-star reviews. We're trying to crack the top 100 of the football podcast rankings on Apple. The only way that can happen is if you guys make it happen. So if you support the grind, you enjoy the content, go ahead, give JT Sports a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast from. Also follow us at JT Sports _ where you can find us on Instagram, X, and TikTok. We post bonus content. We take fan questions and answer them on future episodes. So go ahead, follow us on Instagram, X, and TikTok at JT Sports _ The last thing I want to dive into before we get up on out of here, the Chiefs' offense over the last couple of years has been in steady decline. Last year was as bad as what the Chiefs' offense has ever been under Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. The offense was just averaging everything. They weren't explosive. They couldn't run the football. Travis Kelce wasn't Travis Kelce anymore. And Patrick Mahomes had to keep carrying the Chiefs, making up for the lack of high-end personnel that they had on that side of the football. And eventually, when he got injured, everything just completely hit the fan. And the thing with the Chiefs for why their offense has been in steady decline and how I feel they've corrected that issue this offseason is that they're getting back to the basics. And they're getting back to fixing what has been missing since they traded Tyreek Hill a few years ago. When the Chiefs had Tyreek Hill, they were the most explosive offense in the NFL. They could generate explosive plays in chunks. They could get a 20-yard gain here, a 40-yard gain there, a 50-yard touchdown dime from Patrick Mahomes to Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce there. But with the departure or the trade of Tyreek Hill taking place, Kansas City has lost their explosive identity on offense. Kansas City used to scare teams because they could beat you over the top to the point that every team that started going up against Kansas City was just saying, F it, we're just going to play 2 high safeties. We're not going to let Kansas City's wide receivers get behind us. That then forced Kansas City to have to go to a dink and dunk style of offense once they lost Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce started to slow down a little bit more. Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes said, okay, now we have to have a ball control offense. It's not about trying to get explosive plays anymore. Now we're just trying to take what the defense gives us, and we're just going to try to keep drives alive on third down. We're going to be very efficient in those situations. We're going to be able to score touchdowns in the red zone. We're just not going to be able to just beat you with 1 or 2 plays. We're going to have to put together 8, 9, possibly 10-play drives that are like 6-7 minutes long. And that was working for a while for Kansas City. Patrick Mahomes, over the last few years, his yards per completions have gone down until last season when it slightly went up a little bit. But last season, Kansas City, I feel that was as flat as what their offense has ever looked under Andy Reid, because They were average running the football. They were 24th in rushing yards per game. They were 17th in pass yards per game, despite being 9th in pass attempts. And just overall points per game, yards per game, they were 22nd in the league in both departments. They were not good in third down situations. So Kansas City had to go back to the basics. And that started with bringing back offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy. Now, for a very long time, Eric Bieniemy has been one of the biggest mysteries in the NFL as far as how can this guy have such a big impact on Kansas City's early success under the Mahomes, Andy Reid dynasty, but then not get a head coaching job elsewhere. Not really be a good OC anywhere else. He was the OC for the Commanders for a year, didn't work out. Was the OC for UCLA for a year, didn't work out. It seems like Eric Bieniemy is the equivalent to the Chiefs as what Josh McDaniels is for the Patriots. He's only good for just this one organization, and that matters, because when you have a guy like Eric Bieniemy that's only good with you, that means that there's something that resonates about him with the players, with the locker room. There's something about his personnel that he just knows how to get the most out of. And, you know, when it comes to the personnel problem that the Chiefs have had on offense, they haven't really fixed it that much because, you know, their wide receiver position still isn't really that good. But with Kenneth Walker, though, it allows the Chiefs to have an actual real ball control offense, because the way that the Chiefs were trying to have this ball control offense the past few years is just, we're going to dink and dunk our way down the field. Short passes are kind of going to be the equivalent to running the football. It's hard to maintain that style of offense when your rushing attack is as anemic as what it was the past few years when you had Isaiah Pacheco, who was never the same after that injury he sustained a few years ago. Then you brought back Kareem Hunt for his second stint with the team. And Kareem Hunt may be the slowest running back that I've ever seen in my entire life running football. This brother looked like, at best, his top gear was 3 miles per hour. It looked like watching the tortoise back there at running back. So you bring in Kenneth Walker in free agency. And Kenneth Walker is one of the most impactful free agency signings of this entire offseason, because the two biggest problems that Kansas City has had on offense these last few years, Kenneth Walker fixed: their inability to have a consistent run game and their inability to generate a bunch of explosive plays. You see, passing the football isn't the only way to generate explosive plays. You can also generate explosive plays by running the football. Eric Bieniemy's background is a running back. So if there's anybody that can get the most out of the ground game again, it's going to be Eric Bieniemy, especially when you sign the Super Bowl MVP. You saw the patience, you saw the vision, you see the elite acceleration and burst, what he can do after contact. Kenneth Walker, the only question you have is, can he stay healthy? And even if he does have to miss a few games, you have a great backup option behind Kenneth Walker. Emmett Johnson was my RB2 coming out of this draft class. He was the only thing good about Nebraska and their final few games of last year once Dylan Raiola got injured. And a lot of Chiefs fans should be very familiar with Emmett Johnson, since Nebraska and Kansas City, aren't they just around the corner? I'm not that good with my geography, so excuse me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure Nebraska isn't too far away from Kansas City. So it made a lot of sense why they drafted Emmett Johnson. I'm pretty sure Brett Veach couldn't believe that Emmett Johnson was still there. Great vision, great burst, can catch the football out of the backfield. So he, even when Kenneth Walker is healthy, is still going to get a good amount of work because he's better catching the football than Kenneth Walker. So you got two very good running backs. So even though you don't have a lot of firepower at receiver, you got enough in the backfield to make up for that. Plus, Travis Kelce is not like this dude can't play at all. It's just that Travis Kelce is no longer good enough to be the Chiefs' primary option. That has to be either Rashee Rice or Xavier Worthy. And while we're on the topic of Xavier Worthy is part of the reason why the Chiefs have declined the way they've had over the few years on offense. Because Xavier Worthy, when the Chiefs traded up with the Bills to draft him in the first round, we had the assumption that despite him being one of those guys that just is known for dominating the combine with the fast 40 time, you gave Xavier Worthy the benefit of a doubt because he was going to one of the best offensive minds in NFL history. You thought that Andy Reid will be able to find creative, innovative ways to get Xavier Worthy the ball out in space and to find mismatches that his speed could take advantage of. That hasn't really been the case. Xavier Worthy, we still haven't really seen him pop yet. We thought that Xavier Worthy was going to be like Andy Reid's Kansas City version of Deshaun Jackson, and he's looked more closer to John Ross than he has to Deshaun Jackson. The Chiefs need a lot more out of Xavier Worthy this year for them to get back to the level that they were the season before when they were a Super Bowl contender, because Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce are good, but you still need that number 2 option. Well, what about Tyquan Thornton or Jalen Royals? One of those guys could step up. I love the decision to bring back Tyquan Thornton. He was underutilized with the Patriots. You put him in this offense, he kind of gave the Chiefs in certain games and certain moments the spark that they were looking for from the past when they were able to generate these big explosive passing plays downfield with Tyreek Hill. Now, I'm not saying that Tyquan Thornton is Tyreek Hill. I'm just saying that when Tyquan Thornton made some of the best plays of the season last year for Kansas City, it kind of gave you some reminiscent flashes of what you used to be able to do more consistently when you had Tyreek Hill. Now, I'm not saying Tyquan Thornton is going to be 70% as good as what Tyreek Hill is, but he is a serviceable deep threat on the outside. Now, I loved Jalen Royals when he was coming out the draft before last, out of Utah State. Very good route runner, very solid after the catch. I'm a little bit shocked he didn't get more opportunities than what he did last year. I think that he could really be a difference maker for Kansas City this year. So for Kansas City, you fix your inability to run the football by hiring Eric Bieniemy, bringing in Kenneth Walker in free agency, drafting Emmett Johnson. Then you also have some receivers that have a lot of upside. It's just that they got to get some more opportunities. I think that this year we see the best offense out of Kansas City that we've seen in the last 3-4 years, because their offense since trading away Tyreek Hill has been strictly, we're going to dink and dunk our way down the field. We're going to have a ball control offense. We're going to try to prioritize ball security. Now, it feels like Kansas City now is a little bit more multi-dimensional. Now, when they get the run game going, they can generate those big explosives over the top with play action. Now, you're not as predictable as what you were in seasons past. And it allows you to have a little bit more creativity. With Eric Bieniemy's play calling, you get a little bit more innovation there too, because that's another thing. Andy Reid hasn't progressively continued to innovate. He hasn't continued to adapt. The rest of the league adapted to him, but he didn't adapt to the rest of the league. It's kind of like how, you know how people say every time a quarterback has a great rookie season, oh, they're going to have a sophomore slump because all these defensive coordinators are watching film on them. It seems like Tyreek Hill, when he was with Kansas City, the Chiefs were always evolving. They were always adapting on offense. But once Tyreek Hill left and the offense got stagnant and they went to that ball control offense, defense is called up to Kansas City, and Andy Reid had no counterpunch. Now with Eric Bieniemy back, you have a counterpunch. You have the run game, and when the run game gets going, you have the ability to generate those explosive passing plays again over the top with play action. So this is just my thoughts on the problem that has hurt the Chiefs offense over the last few years and how I feel they've addressed those problems this offseason. This is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. I got to get up on out of here. I'm about to head out somewhere, but smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. I love y'all. Appreciate y'all as always, and I'll see you guys tomorrow with